Welcome to the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. I'm Melisa Liberman, a fellow IC and business coach. On this podcast, I teach you to become a consistently booked independent consultant without becoming a pushy salesperson or working 24/7. If I can do it, you can too. Listen on to find out how. Welcome to episode 217 of the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. This is Melisa Liberman. And today I'm really excited to share with you this topic of fixing the wrong problem in your consulting business. We definitely don't want you to be fixing the wrong problem in your consulting business. As you can imagine, that is going to be a huge waste of time and energy and emotional energy as well. And we don't want that to be happening because that's what ends up really kind of keeping you stuck in the same place over and over again, whether it's feeling stuck charging the same amount, feeling stuck making the same, revenue every year, plus or minus, whether it's stuck feeling like you're doing unfulfilling work, whatever that is. So often it comes down to that you're fixing the wrong problem in your consulting business. And so that's what I want to bring your attention to today. This episode really came about for a couple of reasons. Number one, last week in episode 16, we were talking about finding leaks in your business. And if you're like so many of us as consultants, you love finding problems, you love finding and solving problems. And so, as I was thinking about that leak episode, which can be so valuable, at the same time, we don't want to take that overboard and identify all of these leaks and start tackling them on one by one, because oftentimes it can lead to fixing a problem, the wrong problem in our business, a problem that might be a problem or might not be. That's what we're going to be talking here about today, but that doesn't actually end up moving the needle in terms of your results. So I'm going to share with you an example to bring this to life so you can recognize whether or not you're solving the wrong problem or focus on solving the wrong problem in your business. And so that you can really free up your mental energy, free up your capacity, free up your schedule to be focusing on what will make a difference in your business. So this goes hand in hand with last week's episode in that way. If you haven't yet listened to it, no problem. Stay here, continue listening forward with this one, and then you can always go back to last week's episode and catch that as well. So, with that, today we're going to be focused on what happens when you're focused on fixing the wrong problem in your consulting business. The agenda for today, first, we're going to start off with, give you an example of what this means, fixing the wrong problem in your business. So I'll give you an insight into that. Then we'll dive into a real life example. Then we'll talk about how to avoid fixing the wrong problem. And then finally wrap up with what are the next steps to put this episode into action. So we're just going to hit the ground running today. The first thing before we do so, though, is I want to really highlight a companion resource for you. You can go to icassessment.com, which is independent consultant, icassessment.com, and you will find the Consultant's Business Health Check. It's an online assessment that I've built for you. It's got 14 areas of your business that you can leverage to evaluate the health of your business and help you to uncover and highlight what the priorities are and what might not yet be a priority. And that's a great companion to what we're talking about today, to give you just a bit of an unbiased view as you go through that assessment. It will provide a report for you at the end. If you've taken it before, you can see where your scores are improving, where they might not yet be. If you've never taken it before, it'll give you a great baseline and a way to start triaging and focusing in on what will move the needle toward your goals. So with that, let's start with just setting some further context here about what we're talking about. Fixing the wrong problem in your consulting business. This is the trap. This is a trap that I see as a coach for consultants. I see so many consultants falling into this trap, and this is what it is. It's outgrowing problems without realizing it and continuously focusing on solving those problems, even though you've outgrown them. So a little bit of a twist here. When you think about, are we fixing the wrong problem? Oftentimes the indicator is that we're fixing a problem we've been fixing over and over and over again and kind of cycling in that without even realizing we've addressed the problem and can move on to something else. You might be kind of puzzled here as I'm talking. And so I want to really bring this to life for you. And I will do so here in a moment with an example. But I just want to highlight for you that it's so easy to latch on to a familiar problem and try to optimize it over and over again and not even realize when it's no longer a real issue. It's almost this problem familiarity. We get so familiar with it. It feels like, a comfortable blanket in a way, or one of those favorite toys from childhood, even though you don't want to have that problem. It's so much more familiar than the next problem that really is fixing it will move the needle for you, but it's unfamiliar and brings up so much discomfort as a result of that. So, the impact ultimately when you're addressing problems, the wrong problem in your business or a problem you've already outgrown, is that you're ultimately wasting your time, you're wasting your energy, you're wasting your emotional capacity and delaying real growth opportunity for yourself and your business. So I want to bring this to life with a real life story. I think this is where it'll really start to gel for you. If you're wondering, what exactly is Melissa talking about right now, it kind of sounds interesting. I'm not exactly sure what she's saying. This will, I think, help really bring it together here. And that is a real life story. Of course, I won't use any identifying information here because it's my own consulting client and their own private information. But with that being said, the high level example is something they've agreed that I am happy to share here with you on the podcast to help their fellow consultant. So, with that, let's talk about this example from a client, a fellow consultant. This fellow consultant, a peer consultant to you, they do strategy work, they do a lot of retainer work, they do some executive coaching, they do, really working with their clients to establish strategy and initiatives that will bring that strategy to life and some coaching along with it when the leaders that are responsible for implementing that strategy might need some support in doing so and up leveling their own management and leadership skills. So that's the type of work that this particular consultant does. And they, over the last few months as we've been working together, have been overwhelmed and really questioning as through our work together, me as his coach, really questioning if he could wanted to keep going, questioning whether the overwhelm was just part of the business and that he just didn't want to do it anymore, or is it possible to run this type of business without feeling overwhelmed, without having a packed calendar, with having space to be thinking as a business owner and space to be innovating and space to, just really be able to think. And so as we started digging into his particular challenge, on the surface, he shared with me that it felt like he needed better time management, that we should start there. Time blocking. You know the drill. I'm sure you put them all in, all of these techniques in place, as most of us have. Time blocking, more efficient scheduling, maybe blocking off Fridays to work on the business so that he felt less of a packed calendar, so that he felt less overwhelmed, so that he felt like this was more sustainable. Those were kind of the surface diagnosis here as we started tackling this challenge. And so it was that initial idea. I need better time management. I need some accountability. Those are the things that he said to me. But as we started digging into it further, what we really realized that the real root cause of his particular challenge, which again is really just hitting a maximum capacity, not able to take on any more and feeling so oversubscribed that it felt unsustainable. The real root cause of that was not his time management skills, was not his business model, even in terms of what he was offering. What was the real root cause of his particular challenge was an outdated mindset. Let me tell you more about what I mean. The outdated mindset for him was that he was still fixing the problem. And at this point, it was subconscious. he was still fixing the problem in his mind, not even realizing he was doing so, fixing the problem that he didn't know how to generate leads, that he had a pipeline health problem, that he wasn't good at lead generation. And so when I say he had an outdated mindset, he had been solving that problem for so long that he didn't have a sustainable pipeline, that he couldn't create demand for his services when he needed to on demand, that he was constantly worried about where is the next engagement or client going to come from and how could he have a couple of them at a time and how could he keep the retainers going. All of those questions that he was asking himself came from an outdated mindset that he didn't even realize that he had solved the lead generation problem. And so he was continuously creating lead generation problems for himself to solve. In reality, he has so much evidence. And I pointed this out to him. He has so much evidence that he knows how to generate leads, that he knows, for him specifically, that speaking once a month or a couple times a quarter, going to an event or two, and doing some networking in between those, not a lot, but some consistency, those keep his pipeline filled and generate inbound leads just kind of seemingly out of the blue, although they're not, right? Because he's got those pieces in place and they're creating leads for himself. What was actually the truth is that his calendar was so packed because he had too many leads. He had more leads than he needed. And he didn't have a system for really filtering or prioritizing or saying no. He would just, take them on as they came because he didn't realize that he had conquered lead generation, that he was likely and is likely in the top 5 to 10%, maybe even lower, maybe the top 1%. But even let's say he's in the top 10% of consultants who his ability to generate leads. That's incredible. But he never thought of himself that way. He never thought of his business that way. And as a result, he kept fixing the wrong problem. Subconsciously, by fixing that problem, it was always thinking about what did that look like? It looked like him always thinking about where's that next lead going to come from? Well, I haven't had a lead this week or this month. Have they all dried up? Constantly worrying about lead generation and the health of his pipeline and not giving himself the credit that he actually has a system in place, which again is speaking and going to events and networking, not giving himself credit that he knows exactly how to generate leads for his business. And he knows what to ramp up and down when he needs to, when he's got some capacity that he wants to fill. He never realized because he had been solving that problem for what he felt so long. He never realized that it was something he had already truly solved and that he could kind of check the box on that and move on to a problem or a challenge or an opportunity that would move the needle for him in his business and bring it to the next level. I think it's so fascinating. We start at some point thinking of ourselves, especially when we first start our business. I'm not good at business development, or I'm not good at sales, or I'm not good at marketing myself, or I'm not good at selling myself. I feel uncomfortable because I don't have a label behind me. All of those things we think so often just become part of the story that we're running off of. And we never realize or look at it and say, you know what? I thought that before, but it's really not true anymore. And I can just stop thinking that now. I've satisfied that particular thing, whatever it is. I can move on to the next thing. So often we don't do that because we love, as humans, familiarity. We want things to feel familiar, the comfort zone. Even when we know it's not good, it's still familiar. And that's what's happening here. So the true shift for this consultant that we're talking about here today was not that he needed to, continue refining his lead generation strategy. It wasn't that he needed to improve his time management process or skills. It wasn't that he needed some time blocking to relieve himself of the busy calendar that he had. Some of those things were helpful, But the real shift that he needed and that moved the needle for him, and he described it to me as like really feeling like a pressure was released and sort of this whole new opportunity opened up for him. And that shift that he needed and that he was able to put in place really focuses on three mental things. Number one, his identity, thinking of himself, getting rid of that idea that he was bad at lead generation, just deciding that's a lie. That is not true. Really owning the fact that he's in the top 10%. Like I said, it could be, those measurements are hard to make. So it's a guess in some ways, but giving himself credit that he's in the top 10%, let's say, that feels believable to him. And we could point to some metrics to say that's true. He's in the top 10% of being able to uncover consulting opportunities with clients that are incredibly fulfilling. That's a huge identity shift. Imagine when you stop thinking that you're bad at lead generation, start thinking, I'm in the top 10% of being able to generate leads for my consulting business. It's a complete 180. He no longer are worried about lead generation, are no longer worried about, oh no, if an engagement canceled early, what am I going to do? How am I going to backfill that client? It feels like a problem that you just naturally solve with your skill set. So that identity shift, I shared with you, there were three shifts. The first was that identity shift was so important. The second shift that he made was more from a business positioning perspective. He realized that he had been thinking of his business as I'm just a solo consultant without a label behind me. And so, from that thought process, of course, when you think I'm just a solo consultant without a label behind me, what companies would want to work with someone who doesn't have a label behind them, like a Deloitte or a McKinsey or whatever, or Bain, whatever. When he started realizing and giving himself credit that he had accumulated an amazing roster of clients that did want to work with him because he didn't have a label behind him, that was just something he had been a residual thought that was so impactful, so negative for him and his business because it just kept cycling him into this worry pattern versus thinking of himself as someone who's in demand, an expert in demand. Checking the box that, yes, he's a solo consultant. That's not a problem. He doesn't have a label behind him. That's actually can be a benefit in some ways. And moving past that problem that he had in the past over to a different problem that would be more impactful to solve, such as, for him, we started to identify as we started realizing what the real root cause was and that he could give himself these shifts in order to stop worrying about lead generation and realize that he had that covered, was able to generate leads and is able to generate leads on demand when he needs to, and start moving on to the next challenge, which is really refining his skills and his ability to sell more value based type engagements that are, higher priced. That's what, when you release fixing the wrong problem and cycling in a problem that you've just been solving all over and over and over again, when you release that problem and say, you know what, I'm not perfect at it, none of us are, but I'm in the top 10% with the ability to generate leads. I'm going to move on to the next thing now. So those were the first two shifts that we identified, the identity shift and the business positioning shift. And the third one was what I'll call the focus shift. The focus shift was when we think about solving the wrong problem, he was able to focus his shift from getting more leads to becoming more selective. If we go all the way back to the original problem that he was trying to solve, which was, I feel too overwhelmed. I feel like my calendar, my day, my week is not sustainable. I don't know if I can continue. That's where he was at. When we realized that his challenge wasn't time management, when we realized that his challenge was really driven off of a root cause of thinking of himself in an outdated way and therefore trying to fix the wrong problem, which was constantly trying to fix this lead gen challenge that he thought he had that he didn't actually really have. then he was able to up his ability to think about this and to shift his focus rather from worrying about getting more leads or keeping the leads. I should say it that way. I think that's really helpful to think about it as his focus was more so on not getting more leads, but worried about keeping leads. How do I keep this going? If I stop, then will I be able to start again? Those kinds of things. And when he was able to realize that the problem he was solving was just creating this sort of circular situation, and that he had solved that problem and could move on to another one, he was then able to shift his focus from worrying about leads in his pipeline to then becoming more selective. That's what cleared his calendar, not the surface level, which is getting better at time management or time blocking or any of that. And so hopefully this story really illustrates for you how it could be so easy for us to talk ourselves into, we think that we have a certain problem and it's actually something different is the root cause. When we're worried about and focused on and determined to fix the wrong problem, of course we get stuck. We hit a plateau. We feel like we're stagnating. We feel like we're unfulfilled. And instead, we want to be looking at and identifying what is the actual problem that would make the most difference here right now. What is the root cause of where I'm at right now? So I can address that instead of what feels like that surface level. And this is really tricky because ultimately growth requires giving up familiar problems. He was so good at constantly thinking about lead gen and how to keep it sustained and how to keep the pipeline filled. And he had become so accustomed to that it was like that, like I said a minute ago, that like familiar toy that your 2-year-old has. They don't want to give it up. And when you lose it, I don't know, that's a tangent a little bit, but I remember losing this special little dog that my now 9-year-old has. At one point, we ended up buying like 4 or 5 of them just so that if one was lost, we could replace it. Which, by the way, they're smart. When he was maybe less than 2 years old, he knew that that was not the same dog. Anyway, and as an aside, the point is that we love kind of creating the problem for ourselves to solve over and over again because it's familiar. And so I want to just repeat that for you here a few times today because that's the trick. The challenge is recognizing that and getting yourself out of that loop because ultimately you want to be able to reframe what the problem is, identify the root cause, and be able to then solve the actual problem that you've got and not focus on fixing the wrong problem. So, as we're wrapping up here today, I want to share with you 2 guiding questions that I think could be really valuable as you're thinking about how today's episode might apply to you and your business. You might be similar to this client that I was describing to you who didn't realize that he didn't have a lead generation problem. It was just such a familiar, situation. Or you might be right now in the position of truly having lead generation problems. And I want to help you really tease through this so you can identify the most impactful problem for you to start addressing here in the next few months as you're working towards your bigger vision and your business goals for this year. So the 2 questions are: number 1, which old problems are you hanging on to? Think about it. Where do you spend most of your time kind of ruminating or trying to solve or trying to ask ChatGPT what to do about such and such? How could that be an old problem that you're hanging on to? And ask yourself the next question, which is, how is that already solved? So, the first of these 3 questions: which old problems are you hanging on to? Just look at your internal talk track, you'll find them. Which old problems are you hanging on to? How are they already solved? In what ways are they already solved? Again, knowing that nothing is perfect, nothing is will ever be completely 1000% ever solved, but in what ways is that old problem that you've been ruminating solved? And then thirdly, if you fully trusted that this old problem was already solved, what would you focus on next? When I wrote that question for you, as I was writing this episode, I felt a sense of panic. That was so fascinating to me because it really highlighted for me the danger, the feeling of danger when we have to give up something that feels so familiar. And I wasn't even really thinking about a specific problem. It's just when I wrote that question, if you feel fully trusted that this old problem was already solved, again, I didn't even have anyone in my mind. If you fully trusted that this old problem was already solved, what would you focus on next? When I wrote that, I felt a sense of panic for myself. I feel a sense of panic for you on your behalf too, because we don't love giving up those things that are familiar. So for you, whatever it is, which old problems are you hanging on to? In what ways are those old problems already solved? And if you fully trusted that this old problem was already solved, what would you focus on next? That will help you to identify where you might be focused on fixing the wrong problem and not the actual true root cause of whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. All right. So, as we wrap up today's episode, if you realize that you might be fixing the wrong problem in your consulting business, or you're not even sure what problems or what the real opportunity is or what the possibility is for you in your business, if you're feeling stuck, if you're feeling like you're not going to reach your goals for this year, or that you're undersetting, you're setting lower goals because you're worried about being able to achieve them, these are the types of things that I work on with my clients, the consultants that I work with, helping them to grow their businesses. This is the time to set up a coaching exploratory call to see if working together would be a good fit. You can go to consultmelisa.com. I'll help you identify the shifts that you need to make to grow faster, to move past your plateau so you can feel more confident and successful. Getting help has been such a key to my success over these last 12 years of being in business. And I would love to help you at least determine if it's a good fit. All right. Thank you for tuning in today, and I will see you again next week. Take care.
Thanks for joining me this week on the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. If you liked today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, click subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app so other independent consultants can find and benefit too. And finally, to put the ideas from today's episode into action, head over to melisaliberman.com for the show notes and more resources to help you grow your consulting practice from your first few projects into a full-fledged business. See you next week.